Ladies and gentlemen, Namaskar. On behalf of India Habitat Center, Bharat Bodh Kendra, we welcome you all to this event's evening commemorating the International Year of Compassion, which is being celebrated from July 2025 to July 2026. We are privileged to have with us Hon'ble Sikyong Penpa Tsering, the democratically elected leader of the Central Tibetan Administration, headquartered in Dharamshala. Welcome, Your Excellency. We also welcome Shri Vijay Kranti, who will be moderating the session today. He is a senior journalist, Tibetologist, and photographer. Currently, he is the chairman of Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement, that's known as CHASE, which is a think tank and an active meeting point for Indian and international experts. Welcome, sir. Today's event is being chaired by Professor Dr. K.G. Suresh, Director, India Habitat Center, a distinguished media leader, journalist, academician, and institution builder. Thank you, sir. We now request our distinguished guest, Hon'ble Sikyong Penpa Tsering, Sri Vijay Shankar Kranti ji, and Professor Dr. K.G. Suresh to please come forward for lighting of the lamp and then come to the dais for commencement of this evening's proceeding. We apologize for the delay, just slightly. Yeah, please. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, please. Please, sir. Now we request Director, India Habitat Center, Professor Dr. K.G. Suresh, to felicitate Hon'ble Sikyong Penpa Tsering. Thank you, sir. Now we would request our director once again to facilitate Sri Vijay Kranti ji. Thank you, sir. Now we request Professor Dr. K.G. Suresh, Director, India Habitat Center, to give us welcome address and take the proceeding further. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, my colleague Ainul Abidin. A very good evening to all our distinguished guests, dignitaries, friends, and colleagues. Especially a very special welcome to Honorable Sikyong Penpa Tsering, His Excellency, who is our esteemed speaker today. I would also like to specially thank my friend Vijay Kranti, who is a well-known Tibetologist, and I especially thank him for facilitating today's discussion. I also acknowledge the presence of faculty, students, members of the diplomatic community, civil society, and all of you who have joined us this evening. This is the second edition of IHC Connect. And as you are aware that IHC Connect is a platform that brings together thought leaders to explore pressing issues at the intersection of habitat and society. The first IHC Connect was in collaboration with the Office of Public Affairs of the Baha'i community in India. And we had discussed the role of media in fostering a constructive dialogue. And today, we share not only a common history, not only a common religion, but a common legacy, centuries-old relationship with the people of Tibet, and who are today part and parcel of our very existence, our life, wherever you go, whether you go down south or you go up north, you will find the Tibetan community contributing to India's economy, contributing. There is one community, and I was discussing this with His Excellency, that ever since, the Tibetan community shifted to Dharamshala, there has only been one incident of I won't call it even a clash, one incident of some mistrust between the locals and otherwise the community has been one of the most peaceful communities, contributing, very much to the development of the country, to the growth of the country, and while at the same time retaining their culture. We all feel in whichever city, particularly in north, a visit to the Tibetan market is a must, and the Gen Z has also caught up with that. They, their favorite foods are today now part of mainstream, from momos to so many food items have now become part of our, very much like the parathas and the idli and dosa. And of course, the spiritual legacy is something that we have all inherited. Friends, this year we are celebrating the International Year of Compassion. And we don't look at it, compassion, just as a spiritual value, but as a fundamental principle for building harmonious societies and sustainable habitats. And His Holiness has always looked at India as a guru. And we celebrate Guru Purnima. And we give a Guru Dakshina to our Guru. We all know since our childhood that the Tibetans came to India, they settled down here. But then what has been their contribution to India is something not many people are aware of. So when we were discussing this aspect, we thought that a lot of books have been written on Tibet, a lot of books on Tibetan religion, spirituality, but it is a symbiotic relationship that India and Tibet shares. It's not just that India has given a lot to Tibetans. Tibetans have also contributed in immense measure to India. And that is the symbiotic relationship we have always nurtured. And His Excellency is going to dwell on that. We congratulate him on taking over after a formal election as the Sikyong of the Central Tibetan Administration, of the Tibetan government. And we are confident that under his leadership and under the spiritual guidance of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who is a spiritual guide for almost the entire country, I am sure that, this relationship is going to further strengthen in the coming days. And this is a step forward in that direction. As I said, that at IHC, we have, under the auspices of the Bharat Bodh Kendra, we have been engaging on a lot of topics, including the Indian Council of, a tie-up with the Indian Council of Philosophical Research, to understand Indian philosophy in all its depth. We recently had, Your Excellency, a discussion under the IHC ICPR series on Buddhist philosophy and environment. And the head of the Tibetan center here had graced the occasion as the chief guest. So we have had a very vibrant, India Habitat Center for decades have celebrated the birthday of His Holiness almost every year. We celebrate it here. So we are familiar with Tibet and Tibetans. And this is you can call it the first civic reception in Delhi after your becoming the Sikyong. So we all look forward to, your valuable, deep insights. And I am also grateful once again to Vijay Kranti ji, who will be moderating this discussion. And I now request Vijay Kranti ji to take the discussion forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suresh, for your kind words. Your Excellency Sikyong Penpa Tsering ji, and my many friends in the audience, thank you very much for being with us and coming to this this evening. My job, a good part of it, has Professor Suresh, KG Suresh has already done. And what I will talk about, the other part, is because I am as a journalist, my association with Tibet and the people of Tibet is since 1972, when I first interviewed His Holiness Dalai Lama for a news story. And since then, I was hooked, fell in love, not only with His Holiness, but with the people with whom he represents. And this period, of course, my very old friend Penpa Tsering ji will explain how the Tibetan community has contributed to India as a Guru Dakshina, as a kind of what we call a gift, return gift to the people of India. He will talk about it. My impression about this society is, it's one of those, I think one of the most successful Tibetan, most of the successful refugee communities in the world. It is a microscopic community of only 130 or 140,000 people. Out of that, about 70,000 people live in India. The rest are spread in other 27 countries. So in the world, 28 countries, 130,000 people are spread, and you can see the impact. No refugee community or no other community which is fighting for its cause, for its freedom, for its homeland, has been so successful and for such a long time in expressing their opinion, in seeking help of the world, and being successful in getting support from so many parliaments, so many parliamentarians, and the civic society from across the globe. So that, I think, is, in that sense, it's unique that a society which has a leader whom they follow, whom they obey, and a leader who has vision, who could just, when he arrived, there were 80,000 Tibetan refugees who followed him. And unfortunately, they were the most hopeless, most helpless people. They had lost their home, they had lost their homeland, they had lost their property. Many of them had lost their family members. And they were in a society which was nowhere, what you call, in tune with the life they have been living. The temperature here, the other, hostile situations like many diseases they were never exposed to. But what Dalai Lama did, and that's one of the greatest things I admire as a Tibet watcher, as a photographer of the Tibetan community, that he could organize these people who were in a hopeless situation. He could identify those people who had some talent, somebody who is a painter, somebody who is a singer, somebody who is a dancer, somebody who is a scholar, somebody who is a philosopher, somebody who knew one or other handicraft. He organized these people and created institutions around them. And today you will see that nowhere in the world any refugee society has been successful in reviving their national institutions in exile on such a small strength. You will see they have more, I think, 2 or 3 universities which Tibetan refugees have created, in addition to very high-ranking religious institutions. Our friend Penpa Tsering ji will tell you about that. So at the end, we find that here is a leader, here are his followers and his people who have commitment to their national identity, to their national cause, and who have the discipline and organization to create institutions and make their presence felt in the modern world. So there are many other things one could have spoken about, but this is not for me to speak. I just wanted to give introduction. And I will conclude with one introduction of Penpa Tsering ji. You know, these 130,000 people have a parliament, have a government in exile. They have departments, except rail, mail, and jail. They have all departments which a government has. And they elect their representatives every 5 years in a very disciplined and a secret ballot-based system. And this time, Penpa Tsering ji had the distinction of being elected the president of the Tibetan community in exile as Sikyong in the very elementary vote. Otherwise, they have 2 levels of voting. In the first preliminary, people select people who should contest. The top ranking 2 persons will contest for the Sikyong, the rest parliamentarians. And this time, Penpa ji, he got more than 60% votes. That is his popularity. So there was no need of the second vote. So I welcome you, sir, here. And I leave the dice for you. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay ji. Thank you, Professor Suresh ji, whom I met for the first time since he has taken over the directorship of India Habitat Center. Our association with India Habitat Center goes back, of course, many years. And one of the events that I remember very clearly is in 2003, when we organized a week-long Festival of Compassion using all the amenities that you have at India Habitat Center. So, and you also host the Office of the Foundation for Universal Responsibility, which was founded on support from what His Holiness received from the Nobel Peace Prize. Rajiv continues to be here, and our association goes back many years. You want to take this forward with Bharat Bodh Kendra. Thank you very much, Suresh ji. And just before coming here, we had a little chat in his office. Suresh ji comes from Kerala. I was born in Karnataka. Of course, I can say namaskara and wanakam and all that, but in Kerala it's namaskaram. So it's Keralam, namaskaram. I always say I feel like an Indian, because even though I'm a Tibetan by birth, born in India, been in exile all my life, including my brothers and sisters who are on this side of the aisle. So the topic today is His Holiness the Dalai Lama's Guru Dakshina to Bharat, India. Now, Guru Dakshina is, I understand, is a form of gratitude to your teacher for all the knowledge that was transferred to you in any form, whether it's a feast or any form of gratitude. So I was not sure how do I put this, because we have a lot of things to thank India for, historically. That's why when you talk about contribution of the Tibetans in India, First, I think we need to talk about the connections between India and Tibet historically, because there are several versions of the first king of Tibet. One says he came from southern Tibet. Two versions say that the first king of Tibet, 2,200 years ago, also say came from India. So that connection has always been there. And around 2nd, 3rd century, I think King Lhatotri Nyingze of Tibet received a first sacred text. Maybe that was around the time when, during the Kushanas, Buddhism spread in Central Asia in 2nd and 3rd century. And in 3rd century, Buddhism also spread to China, but it never came to Tibet, because Tibet is the highest plateau and the largest plateau on earth. It's not possible for people to just come into Tibet. You have to climb so many mountains and down valleys and mountains and valleys number of times before you reach the capital, Lhasa. Tibetans practice what is called as Pon religion, the pre-Buddhist religion called Pon, and there must have been a language for sure. But in 7th century, King Songtsen Gampo, the first religious king of Tibet, who also expanded Tibet's territory during those times, sent his minister, Thumisambota, to invent a Tibetan script to India. So the today's Tibetan script is based on Indian Gupta script. So even now, our consonants, 30 consonants and 4 vowels, are very similar to Hindi, you know. So you have Devanagari and Assamese and Punjabis, all these languages originating from the Gupta Brahmi script, and Tibetan script is also one among them. Kaka Kanga, Cha Cha Chanya, Ta Ta Tana, Pa Pa Pama, Za Za Zawa, Shasa Aya, Ra La Shasa. You know, so all these are very similar like Hindi. And Hindi also has a lot of vowels, A, E, E, U, E, O, Aha, which we learned in school up to grade 8. But we have only 4 vowels, the E, U, E, O. So, but it's one of the now 15 oldest languages in the world, the Tibetan language. And just recently, one of our monks worked on a Tibetan to Tibetan dictionary, which came to be about 223 volumes of Tibetan to Tibetan dictionary, which one we presented to the Czech National Library. I'm very happy that Ambassador Zikova, Her Excellency, is here. She was also present when we presented the copy, and we presented the one copy to Library of Congress. It was Kishi Mulam who worked on this for 6 long years. So that speaks for the importance of Tibetan language. So, and then the 2 Buddha statues first came to Tibet during 7th century, one from China, because the Tibetan emperor had a Chinese consort, Wenchen Kongchu, and another Buddha statue came from Nepal, because that same Tibetan emperor had a Nepalese consort called Prikuti Devi. Sorry. So then in 8th century, during King Trisong Dezen's time, then Shantarakshita came to Tibet, Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche came to Tibet, and Shantarakshita's disciple Kamalashila, and many of them. During those times, there were also Chinese monks in Tibet. And the Tibetan king organized a big debate between Kamalashila and the Chinese Hoshangs. And then the Tibetan king decided that they will adopt the Nalanda monastic education in Tibet, not the Chinese version of Buddhism. So since then, we have been following the Nalanda tradition. Between 7th to 9th century, Tibet became a big empire. We even dethroned the emperor of China at one time and put a puppet king there, went even up to Samarkand in present-day Uzbekistan. That used to be extent of Tibetan empire at one time between 7th to 9th century. Then Tibet disintegrated for about 400 years. 100 years, there was degeneration of Buddhism in Tibet, with a lot of adulteration on Buddha's teachings. Then Atisha came to Tibet. Atisha Dipankara came to Tibet in the late 10th century, and then he revised all the Buddha's teachings, and that became the second propagation of Buddhism in Tibet. And then during those periods in 11th century, many Tibetans came to India several times, including Marpa. Several times you can imagine Tibetans coming from Tibet, climbing down so many mountains, valleys, coming into India 2-3 times in his lifetime to study under Indian Buddhist masters, Naropa and Tilopa. And then the Kagyu tradition started, the Kagyu school of Buddhist thought. And then the Sakya tradition of Buddhist thought also started, and eventually it also led to the founding of the Gelugpa tradition in the early 15th century or late 14th century with Je Tsongkhapa. Even Je Tsongkhapa's teachings also has a lot of references to Buddhist masters like Nagarjuna and Aryadeva and Asanga and Dignath and so many. Now we count 17 Indian Pandits as the root of teachings in Buddha, in Tibet. So even now, if you visit Tibetan monasteries here in India, you will see the paintings of all these 17 Panditas whose composition we study, mostly the middle way policy or emptiness or, all the philosophical details. Even now, His Holiness says, when you talk about ancient Indian wisdom and psychology, His Holiness sometimes says that Western psychology compared to Indian psychology, ancient Indian psychology is like kindergarten. So Indian psychology is very, very deep, very, very, deeply studied by so many masters. And that now Tibetans decided, because when Shantarakshita told the Tibetans, since you have your own language, instead of me teaching you in Pali or Sanskrit, why don't you transliterate all the teachings into Tibetan? And that's exactly what the Tibetans did for 5 centuries, from 8th century to 13th century, before Buddhism almost vanished out of India, when Otantapuri and Nalanda and Vikramashila were destroyed by the Khiljis in 13th century, end of the 12th century and 13th century. By the way, the Khiljis also tried to come into Tibet, because Tibet was known for horses, and Khilji wanted to control that trade route. And he sent 10,000 army in 1205 or 1206 into Tibet from the Chumbi Valley, and only 100 cavalry returned back. So that speaks for the protection of Tibet on the border, even during the time of disintegration. So Tibetans, we have preserved one part of ancient Indian wisdom, and we are very proud to be repository of one part of ancient Indian wisdom. Today, if you want to study Buddhism in its entirety, then Tibetan is the only language that you can study all of it. And we are in the process of digitizing all the Buddha's teachings, 110 texts, 200 plus commentaries by renowned Pandits and masters on Buddhism, and then all the compositions by Tibetan masters. Over the centuries, we have been studying Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy, and developing the identity of our existence in this world. So all these have happened because of India. Historically, we don't have much relation with the Chinese. Between 7th to 9th century, when Tibet was a big empire, even the Chinese were also on one side. They had nothing to do with the Tibetans. Then the Mongols became a big power by the end of 12th century, beginning of 13th century, with Genghis Khan and his sons. And when they became a big power, we developed relations with the Mongols, even before Kublai Khan invaded China in 1271. So Drogyen Chögye Phakpa, the Sakya Lama, was a disciple of Sakya Pandita, became the preceptor to the Mongol Khan. And this was middle of 13th century, or just after the middle of 13th century, in 1250s, 60s. Then Kublai Khan invaded China in 1271, which became the Yuan dynasty in China. So Kublai Khan invaded the whole of China by 1278. So the Yuan dynasty in China, it's a Chinese name, but it's a Mongol empire. It's not a Chinese empire. and we had relations with the Mongols even before the Chinese, under those circumstances in that era. And the Mongols ruled China from 1271 to 1368, and the Tibetans were ruled later by the Sakyapas, because they were investitured by the Mongol Khans to rule Tibet, the 3 provinces of Tibet. And when the Yuan dynasty fell and the Ming came in, they ruled China from 1368 to 1644. But we had no relations with the Mings, except for some religious exchange. Our relations were always with the Mongols, till up to 1720. So even then, if you take the historical comparison, the 5th Dalai Lama took over the spiritual and temporal leadership of Tibet in 1642, 2 years before the Qings overthrew the Mings in China. So if you do all these comparative historical studies, then you will realize that Tibet has always been an independent country politically. Of course, with India, there were not many wars. There was never ever war with India. During 8th century, it is said that Tibetan army came up to Bodh Gaya, but they were not stopped by Indians on the way. And they came to Bodh Gaya, collected the relics of Buddha, and went back. That's all we hear about Tibet-India relations on that sense. So there was never ever a war. We always lived in peace. We lived in the mountains. And then everybody were around this high plateau. So we have a lot to thank India for, because of her script, the religion that defines our way of life also came from India. So we don't feel any different when we are in India. We all think alike. Our philosophy is same. And of course, most recently, when Communist China invaded Tibet in 1950, that was just 1 year after the formation of the Republic of China. They started invading eastern Tibet, and then they came to Chamdo by October 1950. And we lost because we never maintained a very strong army. We always believed in peace. And even by the time we lost our country, there were hardly any border patrols on the Tibetan-India border. If you ask Indian elderlies, they would tell you there were hardly any border patrol on the border between India. Today, if you look at what is happening there, then it's quite scary that both the governments are spending so much money on defense. Instead, if that could be spent on education and poverty alleviation or employment, I think both countries would benefit much more than what they're spending on the border today. So when His Holiness came here, as Vijay Kranti ji said, we were put up in 2 camps in Buxar and Misamari in Assam and that area, northeast India. And then slowly, Pandit Nehru wrote to all the chief ministers asking who would be willing to provide land for the rehabilitation of the Tibetan asylees. And Karnataka was the first to offer 3,000 acres of land because His Holiness had visited India in 1956-57 during the 2,500th birth anniversary of Buddha Jayanti. And during those times, His Holiness visited Nagarjuna Konda in today's Telangana, but Andhra Pradesh earlier, which used to be the birthplace of Nagarjuna. So His Holiness went on a pilgrimage there and met with Nijalingappa, and Nijalingappa was the first to offer. So we have 5 settlements in Karnataka today, which is the largest concentration of Tibetans outside Tibet. Many believe that most of the Tibetans are in Dharamsala, which is not so. It's only because of the schools that we have in Dharamsala that the population is beyond 10,000. Otherwise, much of the larger Tibetan populations are in. So all we can say in the form of Guru Dakshina, of course, the introduction of democracy, the very reason that we exist here in India and in Himachal Pradesh, speaking about all the elements of democratic polity within this administration, It was all made possible because of the long-term vision of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the help of Indian government, without whom we don't exist. I keep saying we don't exist if it is not for the government of India. So we have so many things to thank India for. So all we can say is in the form of Guru Dakshina, because His Holiness represents Tibetans and Tibet. He is the other side of the same coin. And we can say that we brought back Buddhism into India since we came into exile. Historically, it was bad news for us when we lost our country to communist China. But then, if you look at the positive side of it, if Tibet had not lost its independence, then His Holiness would have been living in Potala or the Nubulinga, maybe travel in some parts of Tibet, but not get the exposure that he got after coming into exile. So if we look at the positive side, then we can say that His Holiness' departure from Tibet and coming into exile has made it possible for him to spread the message of ahimsa and karuna, compassion and non-violence, not only vocal non-violence or physical non-violence, non-violence from the mind. Every morning, His Holiness keeps saying, the moment I wake up, I think about compassion, helping others. So that is how you give direction to your daily life. Because compassion is not something that you can learn during a workshop or something. It has to be practiced every single minute, every second, every minute, every hour, every day, every year, till the end of your life. So, and His Holiness has today become the messenger of ancient Indian wisdom. He keeps saying, I'm son of India. And he lived all his life here in India. And we are very thankful to the government and the people of India, both at the central and state governments, who have provided shelter to the Tibetans. And we continue to struggle today. Till Tibetans inside Tibet are not free, we will continue to struggle. So this is our pledge, and we follow His Holiness. We follow non-violence as a means. We look forward to a negotiated solution that is mutually beneficial. Under those circumstances, then it could have a lasting effect. If you look at conflicts that are happening around the world today, you don't know whether you are really resolving one problem or creating more problems for future. So non-violence, negotiation are the only ways to resolve conflicts. His Holiness has always appreciated common interests of humanity, appreciates the concept of European Union. Even now, His Holiness keeps repeating that if it had not been for the concept of European Union, Europeans would still be fighting and killing each other. So if it can be applied to Europe, then why not Tibet with China? But of course, then a lot of things needs to be addressed. If Sino-Tibet conflict is resolved peacefully, then it can contribute to a lot of trust and stability in the region, not only in Tibet, because Tibet borders with so many different countries. And I want to end by saying, when we think about His Holiness, when we think about the wisdom of his ancient India, now His Holiness is starting an institute in Bodh Gaya, where you can study ancient Indian wisdom. And His Holiness has 4 principal commitments drawn from all the learnings that he had over the years. 1, His Holiness keeps saying, I am just one human being out of 8 billion human beings in this world. So as one human being, my responsibility is to promote moral values. Doesn't matter whether you are a believer or a non-believer. That's why His Holiness worked for many years with Emory University to develop a course called C Learning, the social, emotional, and ethical learning, because I told that there are many schools who teach social and emotional learning, but what is missing is ethical. I remember one British politician meeting His Holiness, and his first question to His Holiness was, we have a lot of problem with youth. And His Holiness said, everything is wrong with modern education, because too much focus on materialism, not developing the heart. So C Learning, I consider, is one of the greatest contribution of His Holiness to humanity. So in the case of Tibet, whether we like it or not, we don't have a Hanuman to lift Tibet out of that place and put it somewhere in the Arabian or Bay of Bengal near India. So whenever we get to go back, we have to live in peace with the Chinese, with the Indians, with the Bhutanese, with the Nepalese. And as neighbors, if you cannot live in peace, then why live as neighbors in the first place? Right? So this is His Holiness thought. And the second commitment of His Holiness says, I'm a simple Buddhist monk. Right? And as a Buddhist monk, he practices Buddhism. But then you have so many, 8 billion people in this world with all different physical appearances and that many mental dispositions and inclinations. Everybody has. So depending on their mental dispositions and inclinations, whatever religion they want to follow, everybody is free to follow that. So you practice your own religion, but you respect all other religions. And that is what His Holiness has been doing all his life. And religion is supposed to bring peace to humanity, but instead it is becoming a tool for conflicts and disruptions in this world. So His Holiness always promotes interreligious harmony. His Holiness participated and also led many of the interreligious harmony conferences around the world. And then his third commitment is to Tibet. It's not because Tibet is very special because of the Dalai Lama or his people. The Tibet is special because of its geostrategic importance. It's located in the center of Asia. There were borders with so many countries, up to Burma, and the whole of North India, from Arunachal Pradesh to Jammu Kashmir. It's a big land. Just recently, one of our friends told me, I went to the Tibet Museum and I found that Tibet is so huge. So if you don't understand the size of Tibet, then how can you understand the security of India? And historically, we have been the political buffer. Now we want to become the political bridge between India and China, develop more trust so that we can bring more peace and prosperity to everybody. So Tibet is not only important for Tibet because of that. Tibet is important for the whole world because of its environment, because of its location. We call our land the land surrounded by snow mountain ranges. We have Himalayas from Afghanistan to Burma in the south of Tibet, which is north of India. And we have the Karakoram in the west and the Kunlun in the north and the great deserts, the Changtang in the northwest, and then so many mountain ranges in the east. So Tibet is surrounded by snow mountain ranges. And then Westerners started calling Tibet the roof of the world because of its altitude. The average altitude of Tibet is about 16,010 feet, according to NASA. And that's why I keep talking about this. When I went to Japan, I asked them, which is your highest mountain? The Mount Fuji, how high? 3,700, 3,800 meters. And I told them that is like base camp in Tibet. You start climbing from there, your highest mountain, right? So just to give them an impression of how high Tibet is and how valuable it is. Now, Chinese environmental scientists call Tibet the third pole because Tibet has the largest amount of glaciers and permafrost that feeds all these major rivers, including the Yalu River and Yangtze, that flows into northern and southern China, without which they will not be able to support it 1.4 billion people. These are the two lifelines of China that originates from Tibet. And Chinese civilization also originated on the Yalu River. Then you have the Mekong flowing into 5 Southeast Asian countries, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia, the Burma. Right now, so many people's lives are getting affected because China is building multiple dams on the rivers before it flows into another country. It's a transnational river. And China does not share any hydrological data, that they use Tibet's water like a tap. If there is excess, they let it flow. You have flood downstreams. If there is shortage, they shut it off, and you have drought downstreams. People in these countries are now, their livelihoods are changing. And then rivers that flows into Burma, like Salbin, Irrawaddy, then Brahmaputra, starting from western Tibet to eastern Tibet. Now China is building the biggest hydropower project there, which will produce 2.8 times the hydroelectricity than the Three Gorges Dam, which is the biggest on Yangtze. Now they are building it biggest on Brahmaputra. Indian politicians have already started calling it a water bomb because Tibetan plateau came up about 50 million years ago. Just recently, a few days back, when I was in Dharamsala, there was earthquake. In Nepal also, in Afghanistan. this whole, the fault line that flows because of the seismic shift that is happening could be very, very consequential for people living downstream if something happens to that side of a dam inside Tibet. Then the Indus and the Jhelum flow from Tibet into India and then into Pakistan. It's also home to Harappan, one of the oldest civilizations, Indus Valley civilization. So all these countries that we are talking about are some of the most densely populated areas in this world. So we are talking about serious food security and water security in future, apart from political consequences that the world has to bear. But unfortunately, the downstream countries are not able to speak up to China. India is just waking up to the reality of what China is doing inside Tibet. So we need to come together. We will keep fighting. We have our strategy. We maintain a very transparent relationship with the government of India. And we have, as I always say, Tibetans have a saying, when children have problems, they have nowhere else to go but to their parents. And when we face problem, we go to government of India as a parent to seek support. And they have always been there for us, and for which I think His Holiness, you don't have to, even at this age, if an Indian comes to meet with His Holiness, you don't have to remind His Holiness to thank India. It comes naturally from His Holiness. And of course, Chinese government keeps saying His Holiness can return back, but there is a condition that he should stay back for good. And His Holiness says, if I get an opportunity, I'll go, but I'll not live there because there is no freedom there. And I don't want to die with Chinese on my bedside. I want to die with Indians on my bedside. So we have managed to re-establish many of the monasteries that were destroyed by China. 1.42 million Tibetans died as a direct or indirect result of China's occupation. Some 6,000 monasteries were destroyed. Now there's a facade of being rebuilt, but the real education is not there inside Tibet. If you look at, many people can't even imagine what is going on. Just because there is no protests or no killings, that doesn't mean that Tibetans are free. Now there is huge surveillance and control. It's more like George Orwell's 1984 having come into reality, where the state controls everything. And they're also being aided by Silicon Valley companies, supplying tools for, and now China is exporting that to all the autocratic countries to bring in more allies on their side when all these geopolitical shifts are happening. So it's high time that we realize what is happening in the neighborhood, particularly for Indians, because Tibet is directly connected to India's security, and there is no two ways about it. Everybody in the know knows about it. So we will be moving forward with our movement. So in my second term, there are a lot of things that we need to do, including, of course, one of our main responsibilities to see how we can resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict, which does not seem to be possible right now. There doesn't seem to be much space if you look at the policies and programs of the Chinese government. And on 26th of this month, we will be having another event here in Delhi to protest the latest Chinese law called the Ethnic Unity and Progress Law. Communists always have very nice names for programs that has very adverse impact on people. So the whole idea is to how to make sure that Tibetan identity is destroyed. And that is part of India's culture that we have preserved. So thank you very much for this occasion. And thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, Suresh, for organizing this, and Vijay for chairing the session.
Thank you, Your Excellency Penpa Tsering ji. As I was explaining his role as Sikyong, there is one more interesting point which many of you already know, but for those few who are new to the subject, that Mr. Penpa Tsering, his position is very different from an ordinary member of parliament or an elected representative of Tibetan people. After in 2011, when His Holiness Dalai Lama made a historic change in his own position in the tradition of Dalai Lama. Before that, he has been the temporal and spiritual, means the executive and the religious leader of Tibet, supreme leader of Tibet. But later on, when China decided that, or China announced that the next incarnation of Dalai Lama will be decided by not Dalai Lama himself or Tibetans or any Buddhist, but by the Chinese Communist Party. So that threat has become quite serious by now. So in 2011, to counter that danger, His Holiness made a very remarkable historic change. He bifurcated his powers, his executive powers as the ruler of Tibet and his being the spiritual supreme leader of Tibet. He decided to give up his political and executive powers to the elected representative of Tibetan community, along with the parliament and the judiciary of Tibet. He has now kept only his position as the supreme spiritual leader of Tibet. So we have today, if I can use the term, pardon me, I hope it's not offending anybody. So we have the other part of Dalai Lama with us, Mr. Penpa Tsering, because he represents the Tibetan government. And since he is here, I'm sure you all must have, after hearing him, you must have a few questions in your mind. And I'm sure Penpa Tsering ji, as a student leader and as before this, he has been a very active member of the Tibetan society. I'm sure he will do full justice to your questions. So I leave the house open for questions. Can we have, yeah. So yes, number one, if there are any more questions, we will, number two.
My name is Rahul. Hi, sir. My question to when Dalai Lama met Mao Zedong, he was unable to read Mao's minds that he would attack in the future. 1954.
I think there is this myth and mystery that His Holiness can read everything, that he's clairvoyant and all that. His Holiness never said, I have miracles or I have special powers. So, of course, as a human being, at that time in 1954-55, His Holiness was only 19 years old, and he had no exposure to global politics apart from some of the things that he learned from Germans and Austrian political prisoners, the prisoners of war who came up to Tibet during the Second World War. So His Holiness was at a very impressionable age at that time. But when he went to China, he was only 19. Of course, he tried to read Mao's mind and all that. His Holiness even now says, I appreciate socialist ideas because it's egalitarian in nature. Every human being should be same. Everybody, should have the same rights. But again, today's communism is not communism of what the founders envisioned to be. Today, I call China an autocratic capitalist under the garb of communism. So there's no real communism. So at that time, of course, His Holiness was taken around. He stayed there for several months. He was taken around to visit industries, to show how much development China has taken, all that. But His Holiness realized when he came to India and saw the Indian Parliament in 1956-57, even though it was just 10 years after independence, very nascent democracy, even though it was very chaotic, His Holiness found that everybody had the freedom to speak. Because in China, there was no freedom for anybody. Everything looks very uniform, very orderly, but there was by the time His Holiness was to leave back to Tibet, I think His Holiness still recounts, Mao said religion is poison at the end of it. So that itself speaks for Mao's mind and trying to read his mind, of course. But then His Holiness the Dalai Lama doesn't have the power to read people's mind. Of course, you can apply psychology to read people's mind, but if it connotes to that. Otherwise, I'm sorry.
Yes, please. Yeah, after two. Yeah, one and then two.
Yeah, Excellency, in this world politics, there are three hotspots. One is Tibet, second is Kashmir, and third is Palestine. And Palestine and Kashmir is always a fighting instinct. And Tibet is always dependent on peace, spiritualism. Do you think this type of spiritualism is going to help until unless you fight your own? You can't depend on USA. Whenever Dalai Lama is in USA, there is a Chinese instruction not to welcome him in White House. So why not to physically or spiritually fight with your own strength? Because without fight, you can't get freedom. Sometimes you say we want autonomy. We have already Hong Kong and Taiwan. Taiwan is also having its own strength. So why not to think over military way of dealing the situation?
The inside, of course, it goes against our thinking first, our philosophy of Buddhism, which talks about karuna and ahimsa. So that is one thing. Then the second reality is we are only 7.5 million Tibetans inside Tibet in this 2.5 million square kilometers, which is 1/4 of China. So 7.5 million Tibetans, even if every single Tibetan is armed with whatever weapons we have and fight against 1.4 billion Chinese, not possible. United States is not going to not fight for us. NATO is not going to fight for Tibet. India is not going to fight for Tibet. Japan is not going to fight for Tibet. Then the only way is non-violence. And that is the best and the only way. Of course, there are nations, boundaries. Who created all this? Even if you have your own country, if you have a tyrannical leader, what sense do you make of that? It's not a matter of who rules, but the quality of rule. So at least in some of the cases, you are under democratic countries where you have more liberty to express yourself. Today in Tibet, you can't even say, long live His Holiness the Dalai Lama. You can't have a picture of His Holiness Dalai Lama. Now I was told they have scanners to find out whether people are carrying pictures of His Holiness or not. I don't know how they come out with such technology to do that in your baggage. So your iris scans, your blood, everything is being collected by the government. And you have multiple CCTVs that now it makes it very easy for facial recognition. So they use all kind of technologies to control people. And the level of espionage, anti-espionage, maybe you can compare that with SS of East Germany, where the father spies on the mother and the kids spy on parents, parents spy on kids. It's maybe not to that extent, but then everybody is fearful of opening up on your political positions because you could be arrested and the others could report you to the authorities. So the level of control is making it almost impossible to do anything. We witnessed 157 self-immolations from 2009 to 2022. Most of them between the age of 17 to 35. They've never witnessed independent Tibet. They've never witnessed 10 long years of cultural revolution, the destructions before that. But they see only what the Chinese government is doing to Tibet and Tibetans today and are driven to this level of desperation to burn themselves to death. It's not like Tibetans cannot kill some Chinese. They can. I talked about the extent of Tibetan empire between 7th to 9th century. Tibetans, we say the origin of Tibetan also came from the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara in the form of a monkey and a mountain ogress. So Tibetans are violent people, red in the face, violent people. But His Holiness always dissuaded the Tibetans from taking up violence. His Holiness always said, if you take up violence, then I'm not going to be responsible for the cause of Tibet. That restrains the Tibetans from doing certain things. And I think it's to our advantage. If we take up violence, then tomorrow China will brand us as terrorists. Right? Even with the ethnic unity law that they passed, there are some elements of transnational jurisdiction in that law. So if anybody opposes the ethnic unity law, Interpol could be behind you. You never know. So these are the situations that we are talking about. It's not easy to, fight violently, even not practical. It goes against our philosophy. So non-violence is the best means.
Your Excellency.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Honorable Sikyong, Professor Suresh. Thank you very much, and my friend Vijay Kranti. Thank you for inviting me for this very impressive discussion. I don't have really a question. I just would like to say something from the position of the ambassador of the Czech Republic, former Czechoslovakia, and you know all that we were in very similar position under the communist rules without no freedom. It was from those time, it was from the Soviet Union, not China, but it was very similar. And I just would like to say that that will come time when Tibet will be free. Because we wouldn't believe that, the freedom will come, and now we are part of European Union and we are a free country, and in our problems all over the world, this is kind of miracle. So it will come. But I would like also to say one thing. What I understood from your lecture, Sikyong, was this importance of Tibet for not only India but the world. This is something we don't really realize. This is one thing. And second, the Chinese, this huge, very developed digitally and technically country, which is, yes, communist country, which is ruling, how it is ruling, it's afraid of one person.
One simple monk.
And it is one simple monk.
Yeah.
Maybe you remember our president was wishing to pay a visit to His Holiness, and he wanted to, to wish him the best for his anniversary, 90 years anniversary. And there was a lot of, of course, Chinese were furious, and this is political, then said. And I understood, with all the respect to you and to Kashang, there was no problem to meet you or Kashang, but the problem was to meet His Holiness, the humble Buddhist monk. So this is the power. I think this is the power behind. And thank you, India, for having Tibetans, and thank you for fighting for all of us, for the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a very small question. I am the Counsel General of the Union of Comoros in India, Honorary Counsel General. I have been coming to your programs quite often. I heard you say that the Chinese have decided to name the next Dalai Lama. You said like that.
Yes, yes.
So what are the precautions you are going to take to overcome that problem? Because if the Chinese are given that right to appoint the next Dalai Lama, I wish him another 100 years to live. But at the same time, when the next Dalai Lama is appointed and by Chinese, then how will you overcome this problem?
No, Chinese are not given the right. They are snatching the right to choose the next Dalai Lama. They believe, of course, even now they keep saying His Holiness the Dalai Lama is using this as a political tool. Now, who's really using this as a political tool? A government that does not believe in any religion wants to be responsible for recognition of what they call as living Buddhas. So, of course, China wants to control everything. Now, with colonial-style boarding schools, no Tibetan language teaching, only Mandarin, Communist Party ideology, monasteries, numbers are very restricted, where we used to have thousands, now it's few hundreds, no real teaching. So a whole lot of things are happening, and Chinese know that if they can control the next Dalai Lama, then they can control the people of Tibet. But we already have the experience of Panchen Lama. the young boy who was abducted by the Chinese in 1995 at the age of 6. We still don't know whether he's alive or not. So Chinese put a puppet pension. They keep sending him to Tibet. Last year they sent him for more time, just to show to the world that Tibetans inside Tibet respect the Chinese pension, which is not the reality. Because the Communist Party members in Tibet are having problems because they are not allowed to visit monasteries in the first place as Communist Party cadres. But now they are forced to listen to the Chinese pension. So it's a huge paradox, of what they really want. So, and then also they are trying to push this narrative that they have 3 conditions. One is that they will look for His Holiness reincarnation within China. So they are ordering the Dalai Lama not to be reborn outside Tibet. So they don't know, they don't understand the concept of reincarnation at all. And then second, they say they have to use the golden urn, which they claim the Qings gave to the Tibetans in late 18th century. But my argument is there have been 8 Dalai Lamas before that. There was never ever a golden urn. Even the golden urn was hardly used if it was there. And there are no historical records of any of this, just from the Chinese side or from the Tibetan side. Chinese always lie. If they say that, oh, this is mentioned in such and such page of our historical, if you go look for it, it doesn't exist. That's how, but Chinese have a very meticulous way of maintaining history. So from our side, of course, I keep sending this message that if there are 2 Dalai Lamas, one chosen by the Chinese government and one by the Tibetans here in exile, if this Dalai Lama has to die in exile, then what could be the emotional situation of Tibetans inside Tibet? We can't fathom that. We really don't know what will happen. So those kind of things are also there. But on our side, we have been preparing over the last several years based on the statement made by His Holiness in 2011, September. That was the only document. Now last year, July 2nd, His Holiness made a new statement on his 90th, just a few days before his 90th birthday, that his response also to the Chinese government position is that they will look for His Holiness reincarnation within China. His Holiness says, I'll be born in a free world.
Yep.
Very simple as that. And the golden urn, there's no relevance in it. And then the steel, they are using it by force, right? The final authorization by the Chinese government. And they might use the Chinese pension to set the motion and process and then give this illusion to the world that Tibetans formed the search group and they selected, we are only giving the final seal. So what we have been preparing here is first with the Tibetan community, because we are the ones that get directly impacted by the whole process. And then, of course, we have the larger Tibetan Buddhist world in the Trans-Himalaya and Mongolia and, Russian republics of Kalmyk, Tuva, Buryat and other regions, now new adherents to Buddhism. Then we also reach out to larger Buddhist communities in Europe, like Italy Buddhist Union, which represents not just the Pali tradition or the Sanskrit tradition, it represents all traditions. Then, of course, we have reached out to governments. The United States is the only country that has a law on Tibet called the U.S. Tibet Policy of 2002 that has been amended to U.S. Tibet Support and Policy Act of 2020, wherein they have added the element of His Holiness reincarnation, even sanctioning Chinese officials who would be responsible for choosing the next Dalai Lama. So that law is there. We reached out to UK and Germany. They reached out to France also. So UK, Germany, France, Netherlands, Iceland, Estonia, and Lithuania, they issued a joint statement. Then I was also at the Alliance 18 conference last year, organized by Czech Republic Ambassador for Religious Freedom, Robert Rahak. And we appealed at that conference, which is represented by about 38 different countries who believe in freedom of religious belief, the Article 18 Alliance. And they also passed resolutions, issued declarations. So we can say we have now sought support of about 38 different countries from the free world, because we cannot reach out to autocratic countries. And that's what we have been doing. So internally, of course, here, His Holiness has made it very clear that the Gandhem Potang Trust of His Holiness the Dalai Lama will be responsible for the selection of the next Dalai Lama. And that's final. And there won't be new statements coming from the private office from now and then. You know, it all happens when the Lama is about to leave this world. Then the process starts. It doesn't start from now. His Holiness keeps saying, I'll live up to 113, up to 118, 130 also. So I send that message to the Chinese. This message is for you, because you are waiting for this Dalai Lama to die. And this Dalai Lama is committed to live long. So we'll have to see whether communism outlives His Holiness the Dalai Lama or His Holiness outlives communism.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. Sir.
So we will have the last question. Just a moment. May I add one point to what His Excellency just now said? I had a chance to travel inside Tibet a few times, and I covered all the Chinese 5 provinces where Tibet is now distributed. No? Tar is one, Tibet Autonomous Region, Yunnan, Sichuan, Qinghai, and Gansu. I traveled in all, in different pieces to study how Tibetans are living. One observation I was surprised to see that nowhere, I traveled about 5,000 kilometers on road, on the surface. Not one place I found the picture of the Sarkari Panchan Lama anywhere in a private house, in a taxi, in a restaurant. As a compromise, they only use the picture of the previous Panchan Lama. So that shows the acceptance. You asked question about the steps taken by the exile government. I am telling the steps taken by the local people inside Tibet. They don't recognize. In one shop, in a pavement shop, a Chinese woman was selling posters around Jokhang. Barkhor is the circumference street. I found that she had so many posters of so many monks and Chairman Mao and previous Panchan Lama and Aishwarya Rai and Shah Rukh Khan. You know, their posters were there. Not a single poster of the government-sponsored Panchan Lama. I asked her through my guide that why are you not keeping? And she said, what a foolish question. She told me exactly, what a foolish question. When nobody buys his picture, why should I keep it? So I'm telling you, the steps people inside have already taken their opinion. So may I request our friend now, this is the last question because we are over, we are crossing
Your
the time.
Excellency, I am Kanchan Raj Chaudhary, environmental technologist. I thoroughly enjoyed your beautifully and comprehensively narrating to us the history of Tibet in such a short time. It was highly captivating. My question, very short question to you, are the Chinese, is the Chinese government barring exchanges of even deep personal messages between you people in exile and your remaining relatives, etc., there in Tibet?
I think Chinese leadership now believes that even if they want the world to say that they are number 2 or they are one of the bipolar powers in the world. So when it comes to United States, only then will they say, oh, we are not being treated equal by the United States. But when it comes to India, does China treat India equal? If not, then what about other smaller countries in the region? China never treats anybody equal. Then what about the Tibetans? The Tibetans is already occupied by China. So it's under their control right now. So they think that if His Holiness the Dalai Lama dies, then the Tibetan issue will also die. That is their assumption. But His Holiness has been preparing us for the last more than 65 years by introducing democracy. At one time, the 13th Dalai Lama also had to flee. In 1904, when young husband expedition came to Tibet and British India invaded Tibet's capital, Lhasa, the 13th Dalai Lama had to flee to Mongolia and later to China and then came back. And then 3 months after that, the Chinese were on the eastern side. And then the 13th Dalai Lama had to flee into India in 1910 for 2 years. And met with Lord Curzon, and then lived most of his life in Darjeeling, 2 years in Darjeeling. Then 2 years, the Qing fell, and then all the Chinese were removed from Tibet. And then the 13th Dalai Lama reiterated the independence of Tibet. So when 14th Dalai Lama also came into exile, we never thought that we will have to live in exile for this long. Now almost 66 years. But despite all that, whatever Chinese government has been doing in Tibet, they have not been able to win the hearts and minds of the Tibetan people. Because they always look at only one angle, one dimension. For every problem, development is the solution. Only material. But Tibetans have been devout Buddhists for so many centuries. This is what Tibetans are, they're not looking only for material development, which China is proposing. And even now, they say, oh, your Sikyong is going around the world and talking all bad things about China. They are not talking about developments in Tibet. But development for whom? You talk about this dam that is coming up, the Methok. They are already building grids to transfer all this electricity to Guangdong and Shenzhen in the east and south of China to feed these industries. Because I know right now there is energy crisis going on. They have planned for everything, all the solar plants, the landscape of solar plants they are erecting in Tibet. We don't know the consequences on the land beneath that. People are talking about renewable energy and all that. So China has never used those tools that can win the hearts and minds of people. They have never learned to govern. They have always treated Tibetans as different, never as Chinese. Because as I mentioned earlier also, there were a lot of discussions in China as to who's the academic discussions as to who's the real Chinese. Are the Mongols also Chinese? If that is the case, then Mongols went up to Hungary and Austria in Europe during Genghis Khan's time. So can China claim all these territories also as Chinese Middle Kingdom? Are Tibetans Chinese? No. Are Manchus Chinese? No. You watch Chinese Kung Fu movies. All the protagonists are Chinese. All the antagonists are Manchus, because the societal perspective of the Chinese people is that Manchus are not Chinese. They are invaders from the north. That is why they built the Great Wall, to keep the barbarians away, whether it's the Manchus or the Mongols. And the Tibetans were popular because Tibetans could have influence on the Mongols who were marauding the Chinese on the border. So I don't think if it goes the way the Chinese government is going right now, they will never ever win the confidence and the trust of the Tibetan people, whether it's inside or outside. And Tibetan people are mountain people. Sometimes they can be very, very, how do I say, stubborn, not listen easily. Yeah, that also helps in some cases. That is also reason. That is the spirit of the Tibetans inside Tibet are still very strong. That is why we can continue our struggle. If that spirit is gone, then there is no meaning for our struggle. If the Tibetans inside Tibet are happy, then there is no need for us to struggle also. But we also, we follow world politics, and then we decide how to go about all this. Right now, it is very turbulent weather in global politics. We have to see how to navigate and stay afloat during these turbulent times, and also look at opportunities and challenges under the given circumstances. So thank you very much again, Suresh
Right.
and Vijay ji.
So thank you very much. And now before the vote of thanks, I'll just close my my own talking with a small anecdote. I was in one of my travels in one of the hotels in maybe Sichuan or Qinghai. The CCTV was advertising a new serial, and the title was Genghis Khan, the Great Son of China. You know, the problem with the communists and especially the Chinese is they manufacture falsehood to present as truth, and they beat it so much that they ultimately they start believing it and become victim of their own falsehood that they are claiming. When His Excellency said about the Genghis Khan went up to Hungary, so you can imagine when he was a great son of China, so China can claim any day Hungary or whatever. Thank you very much. Now the vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Before we conclude, I have the honor to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of India Habitat Center. I express my heartfelt gratitude to Your Excellency for sharing profound insight, and Moderator Shri Vijay Kranti ji for enlightening us on the different facets of Tibetan studies. We extend our sincere thanks to Professor Dr. K.G. Suresh for his constant guidance, encouragement, and visionary leadership in making this initiative, which is, of course, second in the series, which happened, and it was really quite engaging also. We also like to thank program team, HLRC team, HLC, for their valuable efforts, as well as all staff, including the video and photography team, technical and sound team. Last but not the least, we would like to thank all our distinguished guests and our esteemed audience, scholars, members of India Habitat Center, and students for their presence, your engagement, and your engagement has made this event really meaningful and impactful. Thank you so much for coming here and sparing time. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Welcome. Thank you.